When you're ready. Good morning. Welcome to the South Coast Air Quality Management District's bidder conference for our Rule 1109.1 rule. It's a request for proposals. Here we're going to be discussing the actual proposal itself, as well as providing some background materials, scheduling, et cetera. And then at the end of the session, we'll be fielding questions. For those of you that are on the webcast, you can submit your questions to the following address. Paul's put it on the board there. At any time during the meeting, we'll field those questions at the end of the staff presentation, however. But feel free to submit those questions at any time. Those of you in the audience, you can come up and ask your question live in person. Okay, by way of housekeeping, speaking of those here, let's get our phones on mute or vibrate mode so not to be disruptive. If you do need to go to the restrooms, they are in the back to the left, down the hallway. And if there needs to be an emergency, there's various evacuation points you can see by the exit signs. Okay, so let's get started. Again, my name is Mike Kraus. I'm a Planning and Rules Manager here at the South Coast AQMD. All right, so we released to the public a request for proposal. The purpose of this proposal is to obtain a list or some bids for qualified contractors. We're looking for people with technical expertise, with experience, particularly with control technology, a little bit more specifically, maybe with control technology that controls nitrogen oxide emissions, and we'll explain why that's important for us. And again, another level would be someone who might have experience in the petroleum refining industry. This contractor will be conducting a third-party review of staff's work. So we'll be describing what we'll be assessing, but it's called the best available retrofit control technology. We'll be coming up with that assessment, and we're seeking someone to basically go and review that work and give us their expertise opinion back on that. The total funding for the RFP is $100,000. The RFP, by the way, for the $100,000 is going to be one based upon time and materials, so therefore like the labor cost and the tasks at hand, and then one gets paid as each of those tasks gets completed. Okay, so by way of background, the South Coast AQMD has had a long-running program called the Reclaim Program. This is a program by which large facilities control their nitrogen oxides and their sulfur oxides under a cap-and-trade type approach program. However, recently our board has requested that staff transition that Reclaim Program into a command and control program, meaning that instead of being under a cap-and-trade program, specific pieces of equipment will be regulated based on certain NOx limitations. And this would be just the transition from nitrogen oxides, not on the SOx side. So again, it's a market-based program, and facilities are required to meet some kind of target. It's a mass emissions target. Compliance with that, they can either then reduce the emissions at their facility for different pieces of equipment, or they can use credits to ensure that they're meeting their allocation targets. These credits are usually generated by facilities that go above and beyond, so they have a credit of emission reductions, and that's how those credits are being traded under this program. But basically, overall, there's a NOx emissions goal. And again, what we're trying to do is move into a command and control stage, and this is being picked up currently by a number of rules. We've just recently passed 1135 and 1146 series for all the facilities that are not refinery type facilities. Refineries, again, are in this program, and what we're looking at is a new rule called 1109.1 that will regulate those refineries under that specific command and control rule. Every periodic time, we submit an air quality management plan to US EPA. This is basically what I like to call our report card for our region, but it's also a blueprint of how we move forward in meeting the federal air quality standards. Our most recent air plan, the 2016 Air Quality Management Plan, had a control measure on there that is addressing further NOx emissions from our reclaim program. Again, this is the conduit. This was what was used, the vehicle for our board to approve and direct staff to seek this transition from the reclaim program into command and control. In that plan, it also sought that we were trying to seek about 5 tons per day of emission reductions by a certain date. This is just by way of background. This is not something that the consultant needs to worry about. It'll be something that staff would be calculating. But however, also on the state level, there recently has been an Assembly Bill 617. And in that Assembly Bill, it directed air districts to develop a plan that any facilities that are under market-based approach programs, which happens to be this particular one, to implement best available retrofit control technology by a certain date. They asked us for an implementation schedule by 2019. We've already fulfilled that with our recent rule forecast report in our December board package, if anyone's interested in seeing that. But actually, when we do the transition to ensure that those limitations on nitrogen oxide emissions are being met by December 31st, 2023. Okay. All right. So again, this transition. So we listed out here some of the overarching points that I've already made about refineries will be under a specific rule in and of themselves. This will be all the refinery pieces of equipment, which we're going to go into detail in a second here. But it also will set up what those limitations will be, and then what the schedule will be for those facilities to make those transitions. But there's other sorts of categories as well: electrical generating facilities, otherwise known as power plants, and metal operations facilities, aggregate facilities, et cetera. So some of these non-refinery types of facilities will be captured under different rules. Again, not going to be a concern for the consultant. We're just focusing on the refineries. Now, more specifically to that rule, in that rule development, we've created sort of a universe here. You see those in the 3 boxes. So those might be familiar with our region and our refineries, but we have 9 major refineries. These are primarily crude oil processing facilities, but we also have some smaller refineries as well that will also fall under this rule, such as asphalt plants, biodiesel, and then sometimes you have support groups that support those refineries and their operations, such as folks with a hydrogen plant or sulfuric acid plants, et cetera. So basically what we did was we were trying to come up with what that universe would look like to be applicable to this rule. We came up with certain boundaries. Some of our thoughts was, when you start looking down the supply chain, you could kind of go on forever, really, right? So you needed to have some kind of boundary by which that would be related and thus subject to the rule. So we tried to craft it as maybe a support facility that primarily serves the refinery, maybe not one that just secondarily or just half their operations. Somebody might have similar operations, like a process that needs to go through like an asphalt, and that is a part of a crude product, by the way, anyway. But the heatings and the processing that needs to go through, then you have parallel similar equipment. With regard to the equipment, we've listed out here what we're looking at under our rule and the different types of equipment. So we've got process heaters and boilers, and that's the number of pieces of equipment that are subject in our region and in our jurisdiction. We've got 13 gas turbines, FCCUs. Each of the refineries have those. There's 5. There's 5 major primary refineries. And those are the ones with the FCCUs. We've got incinerators, a coke calciner at one facility, and of course there's internal combustion engines. Those are just auxiliary engines, and again, these are sort of the things that we're sorting out in the 1109 process. And the next step for us is we did a survey of the refineries, and we're sorting through all of that information that we've got from those refineries, and this is how we're sort of building on to our own analysis of the best available control technology. Let's see, what else do we have here? And in our process, just as a way of background, we already do meet with not only the stakeholders, but we also meet with the vendors. So these are folks that are manufacturing some of these control pieces of equipment, but they also manufacture things like burners and catalysts, of course, that can be part of those systems. SCR has seen to be a really efficient piece of control equipment. We're finding really high numbers on that. And we're going to talk about the best available control technology and what that means and why it's really important for us to target those pieces of equipment that best serve our needs for emission reductions here in our region. Okay, next up we're going to be talking about best available retrofit control technology, and I'll pass this on to my colleague, Sarity, who will provide you information.
Okay, thank you, everyone. My name is Sarity. I'm the air quality specialist working on Rule 1109.1. So we'll get into the best available retrofit control technology and what BARCT is. BARCT is an iterative process requiring the analysis of the following elements. We look at the technologies, we look what's available, we establish emission levels, we compile cost information. What's the cost of this? What's the installation? Because some of the issues that we're encountering in these refineries is space. So they say there's no space to build, so there's going to be some labor costs, construction costs. So we look at all that. And then BARCT is also reassessed periodically. Every few years we always look, because as technology advances, because BARCT is forward-looking, so as technology advances, we look and see what's the next, what's the best available technology that can bring us down to the achievable limits. And BARCT can be based on retrofitting existing equipment, such as installation of pollution controls on existing equipment that meets a specified emission limit, and it can also be replacing existing equipment with new equipment that meets emissions. Some equipment we're seeing 75 years old and can be older, and it might not be cost effective to replace to retrofit these pieces of equipment, or if they can achieve that level because the design is just outdated. BARCT analysis should be considered the following by equipment type, fuel type used. Some of the issues we're seeing is that in refineries, they use refinery fuel gas, and there's a variability in heating value in that. So the higher the BTU content per standard cubic feet, the higher your NOx emissions are going to be too. And it's also firing rate too, and how much they operate, because it's not a steady state as to where they're constantly running at a particular rate. There's going to be fluctuations and things that go on in the unit. And then equipment size, it's going to be based off equipment size too. Each equipment, some equipment might not be cost effective. Anything less than 40 million BTU might not be cost effective to put an SCR on there, because so it would just throw it out of the range. Low NOx burners may be one of the technologies that's capable in small burners. And then application and use of unit, the capacity, how much it's used, type of uses, whether there's fluctuations and whether they have to turn it down or make any adjustments, and the heat input. And then there are other considerations too when you look at like how they use it, which unit it's in, because each unit is run differently too. And part of our BARCT assessment, we do a technology assessment, which involves 4 things. It involves an assessment of SCAQMD regulatory requirements, basically how it's currently being regulated, and assessment of emission limits for existing units. Like, what are the units currently achieving? And other regulatory requirements. You can look at other areas, Texas DEQ, Bay Area, San Joaquin, New Jersey DEQ, and areas like in the Mid-Atlantic that also has a lot of refineries. And even international. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the US. So you can look at Germany, the UK, or where refineries are located and see what they're achieving. And the BARCT technology assessment, like identifying SCAQMD regulatory requirements, basically what I described was the current requirements. Are there other rules regulating the same source? Like Mike mentioned on Rule 1147, which governs heaters, but it doesn't apply to refineries. So details like that. And we can provide that information too. And are there any existing exemptions for any piece of equipment? So we can provide that information also. And then we can assess emission limits in existing units Basically, like Mike mentioned earlier, we sent out a survey, we got information, and we also have emissions data from each piece of equipment. So we can see what these current pieces of equipment are achieving or how they're achieving it, whether it's BARCT installation or BACT installation. And assessing other rules, like I said, outside SCAQMD jurisdiction, not limited to California and the US, and again, includes international rules and regulations. Then we can also assess pollution control technologies, all available control technologies, commercially available and achieved in practice, potential emission reductions, new and emerging technologies. So it doesn't necessarily have to be ultra low NOx burners, SCR. It could be some of these new multi-pollutant technologies like UltraCat, ceramic filters, low tox. But then again, you have to consider the impacts of that, because with a scrubber or any type of piece of equipment, you're going to generate waste, and there's going to be a cost associated with that too. And now we get into the request for proposal. And some qualifications of the candidates, what we're looking for. Candidates should have an engineering or technical background with an emphasis in the refining industry. Experience in emissions control technologies, what's available and how can it be achieved. Experience with respect to estimating costs of retrofit installations of emission control, because like I said before, there's going to be probably cost of construction and again, size constraints of pieces of equipment in the refining, because they're limited on space, because these were built 50, 60 years ago. Okay, and now we get into work expectations. What we expect the candidate to do is basically, like Mike mentioned earlier, conduct a review of staff's BARCT analysis. We're currently in the process of doing the analysis. We're compiling all the information, separating the information, and seeing what's available by the survey data that was submitted to us. So task 1 is a feasibility assessment. It's emission reduction levels, independent technology assessment analysis, and reduction levels that can be achieved with commercially viable control technology. Because there's certain technology that doesn't apply to every equipment or every situation. So we're looking for the best equipment that can help reduce the NOx emissions. Assess suppliers and vendors of the control technology, see what they can achieve, see the guarantees, because sometimes these guarantees are only specified over a certain operating range. They're not guaranteed for all conditions, and with refineries, again, the process varies, so it's going to be dependent upon that. And concurrent effects on other pollutants like ammonia, particulate matter, and not necessarily CO2, but CO. If they're trying to achieve a lower NOx limit, they can run the flame cooler, but then again, that results in incomplete combustion. So we want to see if there's carbon monoxide too. Environmental impacts, again, like certain technologies generate waste. Like one example we found was low tox with wet gas scrubber. It's an ozone generator, but then again, you have to dispose of the nitric acid that's generated. So that has to go to your wastewater plant. So things like that we're going to look at too, because that's going to add a cost. And then again, review specific data. Survey data was provided by the stakeholder. Again, this is confidential information, so the candidate will need to sign a non-disclosure confidentiality agreement before looking at the data. And then cost and performance warranty. Contact each control equipment vendor, see what their guarantee is for reduction. And again, it's going to vary, depend, because most of the vendors we contacted are very hesitant to offer anything because each case is unique. So, and cost-effective verification. Review our costs, because we're currently in the process. We're getting the data. Once we get these limits set, we can go and do a cost of installing each control technology. So the candidate will review our work and see if our costs are in line. And then task 3, potential field visits if necessary, because certain facilities, certain pieces of equipment have challenges. Like one is the coke calciner. It's a unique application. There's not many around the world, and there's other pollutants such as SOx that can affect SCR performance too. So the candidate will probably have to go to the site, get operating conditions, meet with them, and so forth, because it is such a unique application. And then gather site-specific information. Each case is unique. And conduct an engineering evaluation of control technology. Can this technology be applied to this particular piece of equipment or this particular facility? Just a complete assessment, basically. And again, submit a progress report for task 4 and a final report. One progress report on the status of where you will be basically midway through. It's like a report, a midterm report. And then task 5, mandatory participation in SCAQMD meetings. When we take this rule to the board, there will probably be questions, so we'll probably need the candidate or the consultant to come and validate their findings. And then we'll get into proposal requirements. Each proposal must be submitted in 3 separate volumes. Volume 1, a technical proposal. Volume 2, a cost proposal, which includes labor, supplies, any costs that can accrue during the evaluation process. And Volume 3, certifications and representations completed by an authorized official or contractor of the firm. And a separate cover letter including the names, address, and phone numbers of the contractors signed by authorized personnel to represent the firm. And 5 hard copy proposals. I know in the RFP we did say 8 in one section, but it's actually 5. It's just for each person that's reviewing on the panel. And always you can refer to Section 7 of the RFP for further information regarding requirements, or contact any one of us too. We can always provide clarity to any questions come up. And now we get into the tentative schedule. The RFP was released on the 7th. The bidders conference is today, the 20th. And then hard copies of proposal are due on 1/16/19. Well, I know it's a short time, but we have to take this to our board and make the recommendation and everything. So no later than 5 p.m. And on February 8th, we're going to recommend it to our administrative committee. And then in March, we're going to take it to our full board and get the approval. And then sometime after the 1st, we're going to anticipate the contract execution. And these are the RFP questions and contacts. So if any further questions come up during the process, you can always feel free to contact us. So, anybody have questions?
Okay, so why don't we do this, Sarity? Come on back here, and then Paul can open the microphone. For those, again, webcasting, we'll put up the email address here in a second. Okay, akim@aqmd.gov. Those are being sent to us here in the room, and if you do submit any questions, again, we can try to answer those here live. In the meantime, I think we have a question from the audience. If you want to come up to the microphone and introduce yourself and pose as many questions as you have for us.
Yes, I'm Larry Musio with FERCO. We're an engineering company in Laguna Hills. Just a quick question in terms of the technical part of the proposal. Can you kind of outline what you're really looking for there? Do you want us to explain all these technologies and how they work and everything, or are you more interested in just getting our experience with working with these?
Sure. So by way of background, this is not the first time we've conducted these sort of analyses and we brought in contractors. Along with this rule development, we have a working group, and these are folks that are affected by the rule or folks that are in our community, let's say, that are interested in the rule, et cetera. One of the things that they did raise was in the past how they felt there was a real need for sort of that checks and balances kind of, process, which we don't disagree with. I think that is important. We felt like we did conduct these in the past, mind you, for the record. But we wanted to take a sort of a different approach on this. And in the sense that, we ourselves will be doing the initial analysis. As I was noting earlier, there's different types of equipment, specific types of equipment. We have those in different categories, and we kind of do sometimes little subcategories, things like that. We're going to be doing a line-by-line identification of what we believe is the best control technology out there, the vendors, what they're able to achieve. What we're seeking from this consultant is basically a verification. Do you, in your expert opinion, agree with that? We need basically support for those decisions that are being made. And again, so that's why we're looking for the technical expertise. I don't think we really need to know, unless it's some really new technology that we're not familiar with or something that hasn't been established, something like an SCR, for example. That technology's been around for decades. I think everyone kind of quite understands that. I think from the new emerging ones, we'll do the research up front, and then you could do that verification for us. Again, a lot of times people, let's say even talking to vendors, there's been a concern that vendors might say something to us and then maybe something different to a stakeholder or someone different to a consulting. So it's kind of important that we get everybody sort of on the same page with regards to that. Ultimately, we need to come out with a rule that will have various NOx emission limitations for various types of equipment. And there might be different ways of cutting that down a little bit. Maybe just obviously just not a boiler, but there's gonna be a different rating of the boiler. Maybe the way that boiler is being used specifically in a process or something like that. Again, we'll come up with that first analysis. It's basically the consultant will be doing our checks and balances for us. And that's why we kind of kept it a little open-ended with regards to, does the consultant want to go and visit someplace on site that might have a new technology and actually see that for their own, and be that third-party person. So when we roll out with those, we say, we have support for that. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Larry.
Hey, Colin Pierce with ERG.
Hey, Colin.
Hey. For the period of performance for the work, how rigid or flexible is that? Do you have external deadlines? You mentioned the governing board. I'm guessing that might play into it. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So for every one of our rules, we have a schedule that we set up. So it gives us sort of a guidelines, and we try to make that a realistic schedule. Mm-hmm. That doesn't always happen. To directly answer your question, there is flexibility in that schedule. Okay. There's no, what we're trying to do is, and I noted earlier, that when we have the state law, the Assembly Bill 617, saying this best available control technology should be implemented by these companies by a certain fixed date, we're trying to do our due diligence and stay on a good schedule there to provide that necessary time for the implementation to happen. So it's not something that we just take our time with. So we do try to kind of keep the ball moving, but we do want to make sure that ultimately we want a thorough product, right? And we want to make sure that there's been, again, the due diligence base, from the consultant as well. So if additional time is needed, we're not held to any statutory sort of deadline to report back and things like that. Our working group will be seeking, answers not just from us, but, how's the consultant working and verifying and what have you. Of
course.
So.
Yeah. No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Mario from MD Environmental.
Hi, Mario.
Hey. Just a quick question. So are you going to have multiple contractors, consultants for the project?
We are currently only seeking one
country.
Primary contractor. Now, sometimes people will submit with a subcontractor for something very specific, et cetera. We're not closed to that. We're not closed to that. But we also recognize that sometimes even within a company or subcontractors, you have all these different voices kind of going on, and we need to make sure that there's consensus.
Okay. Yeah, that was it. Thank you.
No problem, Mario. Yes, Colin.
Hey, my other question was, there's a section in the RFP about whether or not this might be considered a public works project. Is that going to affect this RFP? I think it was a small line item that someone else at my company caught. Maybe I can provide you more detail on that.
Yeah, a lot of, a majority of the contract ends up being very like government boilerplate. And I believe that might be that one of those sections. We ourselves,
Section 9.J, IX.J says that if this is a public works project, then a contractor registration number is required. Just kind of another administrative thing we wanted to make sure we had covered.
right. If they, yeah, maybe because we're a public agency and this is public funding, that's maybe how legally that would be considered. Oh, it says if the proposal is a public works project. Oh, I see. So, no, this is not a public works project. So,
Okay.
okay, I wanted to make sure there was an if there, okay. I thought, oh, gosh, maybe this is something they expect of everybody. Good to know, though, so thank you, Colin, we're learning. No,
We
you're
read it
fine.
closely.
Yeah, we're not constructing anything, this is, we're hiring for your brains.
Gotcha. Yeah. Thank you.
You bet. Anyone else in the audience? Again, a reminder for those that are viewing and experiencing this through webcasting, AQM@aqmd.gov if you have any questions. Then we turn to AQM herself, Miss Angela. Reset, refresh, anything? Okay. This did happen to us one time, we didn't hit a refresh and closed out the meeting, and then the guy came up to me afterwards and said, oh, we got a bunch of questions. I was like, well, we'll have to answer those via email, so. Okay then, well, again, as Sarah already noted, we've got contact information here. Feel free to give us a call. Again, we're looking for submittals come January 16th. So, again, if you have any.
It's a hard deadline.
Now that is a hard deadline, and our budget group or contracts group really kind of holds it to it, and 5 o'clock too. So don't procrastinate. Feel free to submit things earlier, and we look forward to your bids. All right. Have a great holiday.